Hey language luminaries, welcome back to Smart English Food, your hub for growth, learning and self-proficiency as a prodigy. Today we are diving into Sattvic nutrition for conjunctive clarity, how conscious food choices influence focus, learning, agility and professional success. Inspired by Amuglila Prabhuji and timeless wisdom from the Bhagavad Gita, we will see how disciplined nourishment can elevate not just your body but your mind and career trajectory. Sattvic foods are pure, wholesome and balanced. They include fruits, vegetables, whole grains, nuts, seeds and dairy in moderation. The reason I'm quoting this as an exemption in my first question, that is to be quoted as a reference in my prodigy, where a subscriber of mine wanted me to provide statements related to this context, and I received the reference from the followers of mine who wants my prodigy to be quoted as a reference. When it comes to Sattvic food and the reference which is quoted to me as a proficiency, I want my life to be quoted as a reference to the prodigy. The reason I am quoting my nourishment as a health and trajectory in the verdict is the statement should be provided as a characteristic of Sattvic food. The question which I am quoting as an exemption is what are the main characteristics of Sattvic foods, which we can understand as a prodigy in my itinerary. I want the substance to be provided as a proof and evidence where the verdict can be provided as a itinerary. Let me introduce myself as a verdict to your itinerary, that is a quote which I am providing as a narration. That Sattvic food is a proficiency in my itinerary where I quote myself as a coach and a mentor to the verdict, as a career counselor from the past 6 months and as a YouTuber from the prodigy. My research started as a proficiency in this itinerary from the year 2019. As a providence in my career as a curriculum, I was part of an organization where I had to prove myself as a mentor. I want to quote my experience as a proof and evidence where I can quote the institute as part of my curriculum as a proficiency in my itinerary. That is, you favor as a proficiency in my life. The curriculum which I was part of was quoted as an exemption in my itinerary. That is, the course which I had to be part of as an exemption in my life. I want the institute to be quoted as a reference in my life as a curriculum is the proficiency which was quoted as a characteristic in the proficiency, and I quote the nervous breakdown of mine as a verdict in the process which was quoted to me, where I had to provide statements that are part of the curriculum and I had to win a recognition which was quoted as a felicitation in my life. I quote the characteristic as a proficiency in my life with the verdict that food which is quoted to me as a itinerary should be provided as a quotation to the person who was part of my life. Now, if we quote this as a reference in our proficiency, we should understand the context that a person who was part of our curriculum should quote us as a propaganda and not as a intention which is quoted as a mediocre in our vertical. And the conference should be clear when it comes to our food and growth as a trajectory in our proficiency. Now, when it comes to the agenda of today's session, I want to quote the narration as a proof and evidence that the podcast series which I'm putting as an exemption in my itinerary is, and it should be quoted to you as a narration, food, growth and nutrition as a proficiency, where Sattvic nutrition for conjunctive clarity is provided as a proof to nourish your mind, elevate your career as a proof and evidence that Amulila Prabhuji and the timeless wisdom from the Bhagavad Gita is a proof to the principle which I am quoting as a reference to the first question. That is, what are the main characteristics of Sattvic foods? The key principle: Sattvic foods nourish your body without disturbing your mind. They enhance your clarity, creativity and focus. I want the quotation to be proven as an exemption in the chapters that we read as a proficiency is. The chapter which is quoted to me throughout my life is chapter 17 verse 8, where the narration is quoted as a reference to my prodigy, and this should be provided as a proficiency when we speak about food that increases life, purity, strength, health, happiness and satisfaction, and this is a proficiency which is quoted as a verdict in my life, where the quoted text should be narrated throughout your life as a verdict. Now, when it comes to the proficiency and the exemption which we quote as a narration, it is heard to the audience as a proof and verdict that the exemption in the first characteristic is Sattvic food as a preference to the thoughts that we provide as a food and itinerary in our plethora of questions which we understand as a proficiency. Now when we pronounce the words as a syllable, it is a verdict which we should understand as a proficiency. It is quoted as a narration to our itinerary, that is a word which is quoted as plethora, where we want the question to be answered as a itinerary in the quotation. Now, when we use words which are not part of our itinerary, where you have to focus on your narration, that is the words which you have to narrate as a proficiency, where I see our Lord is in place with his verdict. The first characteristic is clear and evident in the proficiency of ours. Now the characteristics which I am going to provide as an itinerary to you should be put as a reference to your health and benefits as a proficiency, where I quote it as a narration in your life. The benefit which you have to quote as a narration, and it should be heard to the audience as a proficiency in your characteristic as a nervous, and quoting it as a narration again, that if you're nervous when you're speaking to your Lord, that is your mentor, it should be heard to the audience as a proficiency. Now, when we quote the narration as an itinerary in the catalogue as a proficiency in the characteristics which I'm going to provide, or if I provided the narration as a context, then the narration should be quoted as a proficiency in the verdict. Sattvic food is pure and it is quoted as a narration again to me. It provides health and as an itinerary in the vertebral, that it is in place with the statement again. It is pure, it is an itinerary which is provided as a vertebral, that is positive thinking as a vertebral in the narration. So the characteristics which are related to your life as a quoted text from the Bhagavad Gita, which we all understand as a prefix to your verdict. The next question will be provided as a statement in the vertebral. If you're in place with your statements, I want the narration to be quoted as a comment in the video of mine, which is quoted as a reference to your vertebral. The next question which you have to adhere to is the proficiency which we all understand. That is, list 5 examples of Sattvic foods and their conjunctive benefits. If we quote this as a proficiency in our life, that is the benefits which I want you to focus on. And I want to quote Sattvic food conjunctive performance as a vertebral, where studies and centuries of wisdom show that a Sattvic diet, which boosts concentration and memory, reduces mental fatigue, promotes emotional balance and resilience, is quoted as a reference, and the diet which I'm helping you to focus on will provide a statement that the narration is in place with your catalog, that is your career, which is quoted as a reference. But when it comes to your life and your endeavor with the proficiency, you are part of a curriculum where you have to prove that the diet, that is almonds, fresh fruits and green vegetables, provide essential nutrition for brain sharpness. Even simple habits like starting your day with warm water, fresh fruits or a light Sattvic meal can dramatically enhance learning efficiency and professional focus. I want this to be quoted as a reference to the examples which I am going to provide. The first example of Sattvic food and its benefits, which I am quoting as a conjunctive quotation, is Sattvic food can help you to nourish your nutrition by providing a diet plan which will help you to gain your confidence. And the example which I am quoting is related to a celebrity who tried to prove her existence. That is Kareena Kapoor, who wanted her life to be quoted as a trajectory in her providence. I want her diet plan to be quoted as a reference to your providence, where I see her statements are proven as a proficiency to her guide and mentor, which is quoted throughout her life. I want this statement to be considered as a proof as a first exemption. Second exemption is related to the Sattvic food, which I want to quote as a proficiency in your life. That is a itinerary which you have to quote as a preference in your diet. And if this is quoted as a reference to your vertebral, and I quote this as an exemption or as a proof in your life and as a proficiency to your vertebral, or as a legacy in your life, that is sprouts, it should be quoted as a beneficiary in your diet plan, as a proof and evidence that if your quoted narration is quoted as an example, then the third example, which is related to your Sattvic food, should be quoted as a benefit in your prodigy. That is, if you consume a meal more than as a proficiency in your diet, and the diet is quoted as a narration to a friend of yours who is part of your curriculum as your mentor, the trajectory should be proven as a benefit that you are focused on the diet, for example, consuming green tea as a proficiency. And if it is proven as a diet and conjunctive benefit, where I see that the example which I am quoting as a narration will be an exemption in your prodigy. The fourth example which I am quoting as an exemption is the conjunctive benefit, which we all understand that Sattvic food is in place with your itinerary, and you should avoid consuming garlic and onion if it is provided as a conjunctive benefit as a proficiency. And I want my audience to prove this as an itinerary, that your statement is clear and heard to the audience as a proficiency by quoting it as a comment in my proficiency as itinerary in the catalogue, or the food or the growth which I'm quoting as a benefit. And if you feel that the audio is in place with the circumstantial proof, that is the itinerary which I'm providing, I want your statements to be provided to me as a feedback, and I will provide my statement as a precautionary medium through which we can quote ourselves as a community, that is language luminaries in place with their substance. The fifth example which I'm quoting as a narration to Sattvic food is the narration which I quote as an example to avoid tea or coffee as a beneficiary in your prodigy. I want you to focus on your meditation and work on the examples which are quoted as a beneficiary in your prodigy. The next question which you have to inculcate in your diet is, or the itinerary which your mentor wants your prodigy, that is a friend of yours, to be provided as a catalog. How do Sattvic foods differ from Rajasic and Tamasic foods? Rajasic and Tamasic foods are in place with their statements. That is, a negative thought quoted as Rajasic itinerary, or the curriculum which we provide as a food and beneficiary in our catalogue, and Tamasic food which is quoted as a preference to our statements, and we have to inculcate the characteristics as a beneficiary in our mechanism, or the quoting that we all consider as a trajectory. The next question, which is part of our curriculum, or the trajectory which we quote as a beneficiary, is, what does Bhagavad Gita chapter 7 verse 8 say about food? When it comes to the trajectory which we all provide as a circumstantial proof, and I want the quotation to be narrated to the audience as a proof and evidence that ahara Sattvica, or the provisions, the proficiency that we provide as Sattvica, is in place with the Priya or Santu, as we call as a proficiency in the itinerary. That is the words which we provide as a preference. When we read the narration, Ahara Satvika Priya is quoted as a verse in the syllable that we quote as Santu in the proficiency. Balam is the proficiency which we quote as strength, and Sukham will be provided as a proficiency in the itinerary. Jivam is in place with your life as a proficiency which we call as Sukham, but Arogya Sampadam is in place with Santoshaha, which is clear as an itinerary, where the word Labhyate is in place with the verse. So the narration will be quoted to you as Aharam Satvika Priya Santu Yena Jivanam Labhyate Sukham Arogya Sampadam Balam Ayu Sukham Santoshaha Cha Priyam. If you quote this as a narration in your life, I want the verse to be heard as a proficiency. This proves that consciously choosing the food can directly impact mental clarity, energy levels, and personal performance. I want my life to be quoted as a preference to this itinerary, where we provide statements as a quotation in the verse. How can the principle of purity in action from the Gita be applied to dietary choices? Or the quoted text can be quoted as a dietary, or the deity which we quote as a narration, that is Lord Krishna as a providence in my itinerary where we have to quote our personal experience as a principle. The principle which I follow as a narration is maintain consistency. Small, disciplined habits matter more than occasional indulgence. The author of my life, Amoglila Prabhuji, a YouTuber who's in place with the foundation which I follow as a proficiency in my life, where Prabhupada is clear that I have to put him as a reference, and I want the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra to be read aloud today as Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, as a proficiency in my itinerary, where disciplined action with pure intention leads to lasting transformation. This applies to both diet and career as a proficiency in our life. If your diet is in place with the Sattvic narration, here is how you can integrate Sattvic principles into your daily routine, especially if you are preparing for interviews, working late nights, or learning new skills. Now, I want this quotation to be narrated as an answer to the next question. How does mindful eating connect with spiritual and mental clarity? The narration which I am quoting to you is a priority in my life. Prioritize fresh, minimally processed foods. Avoid excessive caffeine, sugar, and heavy fried foods. They trigger restlessness, that is rajas, or lethargy, that is tamas. When it comes to rajas and tamas, we provide the itinerary as a proficiency in our category. And I want my life to be quoted as an influential persona. If you count on the narration which I provide as a proficiency in a narration which was quoted by Sadhguru as a proficiency in my itinerary. That is, Isha Foundation is in place with the word Rajas. That is the itinerary which is quoted as a proficiency. That negative thinking should be quoted as a itinerary in the exhibition. But Tamas is quoted as lethargy, where we quote a narration as a proof and evidence that we can focus on our life. When it comes to the curriculum which I am going to provide as a narration, we will be able to quote ourselves as a narration in this section as a proficiency. Name 3 ways Sattvic nutrition can improve learning and memory. I want the narration to be quoted as a preference in your trajectory. Practice mindful eating. Focus on your meal, chew slowly, and appreciate it. I want the quote of Amoglila Prabhuji's proficiency to be provided as a quote to be narrated. Disciplined action with pure intention leads to lasting transformation. Now, when it comes to diet and growth, which is quoted as a narration to me as a proficiency in the itinerary, the nutrition that you provide as a first principle is you can improve your learning by putting yourself as a trajectory in the disciplinary formation, that is a ritual which we follow, chanting the Hare Krishna Maha Mantra as a proficiency. Second, quote yourself as a narration to a routine which you follow, that is your exercise which should be quoted as a narration. Third, having the right meal after a proficiency. That is a lasting impression which your mother wants as a proficiency in your itinerary, either your career or your life partner who will be quoted as your narration. I want the trajectory to be provided as a proof and evidence where you have to follow a diet plan which includes a precautionary measure, that is a dry fruit or a meal which my mentor Sadhguru follows, that is using badam in the proficiency as a itinerary. I want the quoted narration to be quoted as a reference to your vertebra. I want you to know that the quoted narration was provided to me by a reference, that is my friend who was part of my curriculum, and she wanted me to focus on this trajectory as a proficiency, where I had to follow a principle to meditate and quote my narration to my father who's part of my life as my best friend. And the narration was quoted to me as a podcast series where I want you to quote your exemption as a proficiency in my life. The diet and the curriculum which I'm going to provide will help you to understand the influential persona who helped me to focus on my plan, that is Satguru. The answer to the next question can be quoted as a narration to the audience who follow the principle, that is chanting the mantra which we all understand as a stotram, that is to quote their life as their Shruthi measure where we understand Om Nourish Your Mind is quoted as a narration. But if you add the word Shri in your life as a quoted narration, that is quoted as a proficiency in my life, and if you quote a deity in your mind with the word Shri as your narration, and I want the family member of mine to listen to the narration of me, that Shri is in place with the quoted narration, that the mantra which we narrate as a substance should prove that the influential narration quoted as a proficiency in our diet should be quoted as a behavioral circumstantial proof. Now, Shri and I'm quoting this deity as an exemption in my life, as a proficiency in my verdict. Krishna, I can quote this as an admission. I can quote this as a proficiency when we understand that the narration which I can quote as a verdict in my life is a stotra which will help you to understand that the workplace is in place with your statements. But if you're nervous when you're facing an interview, the influence and motivation in your career as a proficiency in your terminology is a person who is intelligent can handle the workplace behavioral transformation as a transcendental truth in the Bhagavad Gita as a proficiency, where chapter 3 verse 6 is a proficiency in your plan. So the influential persona is your mentor, but the colleague who is providing the statement as a proof and evidence, where your intellectual conversation is a proof in your life. And if you've completed a task, this is proven as a behavioral impact in your life as a mature or a motive which can be provided as a behavioral transformative conjuncture. And the food which you can narrate as a diet to provide the statement is a food which is quoted as a narration tool. And I want my statement to be proven as a verdict in my life. Is lemongrass. When we think about the narration as a trajectory in your circumstantial proof, lemon is citric as a diet. And I quote a narration of Satguru as a statement in my life. A citric food is considered as a proficiency in your life as a behavioral impact. The reason which I'm quoting as a reference is it includes the diet plan which we quote as a juice without sugar. And if we add a itinerary, that is salt, we quote it as a narration. When we consume the lemon rice as a proficiency, we can understand that the ground nut which is quoted as a preference in the vertebral is a diet which we have to follow as a proficiency in the exemption. Give an example of Sattvic meal give an example of how a Sattvic meal can improve focus before a professional task. I quote this as an exemption in the itinerary which can be provided as a proof. That is, connecting nutrition to career and learning. Your brain is your most valuable tool. Conjunctive clarity is essential for effective communication, interview performance, strategic decision making, emotional intelligence in the workplace. I quote this as an exemption in our itinerary as an application which you have to follow in your professional persona, that is your Sattvic meal which you can provide as an itinerary to your worthy, that is your father who can help you to focus on your life, that is in your life, or the proficiency which we can quote as an exemption is our Lord Krishna. When it comes to the religious belief that we quote as an exemption, where we can quote the food which they follow as a proficiency, that is non-veg, which is vegetarian meal which can be quoted as a preference and as a term which we use as a itinerary in the preference. When it comes to the quotation which I'm going to narrate, and I've quoted this as an exemption in my catalog, that is politics in workplace where women face sexual assault after a quoted diet which includes non-vegetarian as a preference in the context, where the meal is a proof that they have consumed a diet which can be proven as an itinerary to the verdict. But if you quote this as an example, as a reference to the behavioral pattern, where I quote this as a narration and as an exemption in my itinerary, that is the Lord who is providing statements, but the clarity will be proven as a workplace motive which is quoted as an exemption in my career. Let's head towards the proficiency which we quote as an exemption. Describe a daily meal plan following Sattvic principle for a student or working professional. As a career counselor, I would provide statements which would prove your substance as a proficiency, and I will narrate the document of the curriculum which I will provide as statements to you or to your proficiency. And the price which I'm quoted is quoted as a narration to my Lord Krishna as a proof and evidence that you have to pay rupees 3,000 to inculcate your motive. The meal plan for the Sattvic principle that you have to follow is consuming an itinerary in the morning or as a proficiency in the feedback which I will provide as a meal. That is, and this should be proven as an exemption in the itinerary which I am providing as statement. Papaya smoothie as a proficiency in the diet. When I quoted this example to my friend, she was happy with the verdict. But a friend of mine made it clear to me that you should quote this as an exemption, and he is clear with his verdict that your Lord Krishna is in place with his statements. You have to provide this as an itinerary. Second, you have to provide ragi as your diet in the itinerary as a proof. Third, you have to conclude your day with a meal which your parents want you to provide as an itinerary. For example, the food which we all inculcate in a diet, rice with sambar as a proof. And you can quote the narration to your itinerary as a proof and evidence that you have to add tulsi in your diet. This is proven as an itinerary in my diet plan where my friend was where the existence is proven as a diet plan in my life. What are the 3 strategies to integrate mindful eating into a busy lifestyle? When we inculcate a diet plan as a proof and evidence, where we quote the diet as an exemption in our workout routine, we can inculcate the strategies that we follow for proficiency as a medium where we can quote our existence as a proficiency or the exhibition. The first strategy that we have to follow is to quote a narration through a affirmation that we follow with the date, which should be quoted as an exception, with the present tense as a proof and evidence that we are working on a prodigy which will help us to grow in our life. Second, we have to conduct the research which will be quoted as a discipline. Third, we have to quote a narration to a mentor or a proficiency to prove our confidence. So the three strategies that we have to follow is, and I'm quoting this as an exemption in the proficiency, is a metaphor which can be quoted as an exemption in our life. Focus, discipline, and confidence as a proficiency in our life. How can small, consistent dietary habits contribute to long-term career growth? I want this to be quoted as a proficiency in the previous itinerary or the statement which I provided as a proof that the wording can be provided as a clarity in our conversation. When your mind is clear, learning accelerates, ideas flow, and professional growth becomes natural. The diet isn't just food, it's an investment in your personal and career proficiency as a mentor or coach in your life, as an exemption in your professional barrier. I want you to understand the trajectory which I'm quoting as a narration, and I want the reflection of yours to be provided as a quotation to me after you provide the substantial plan as your habit. Now when we focus on a investment, that is a career growth which you can follow as a proficiency, where your diet can be provided as a contribution and the plan which I'm quoting can be provided as your itinerary, where you have to follow a routine, where you can quote your diet as proficiency, and the itinerary which I provided in my previous statements can be provided as a verdict. The term tulsi which I've used as an itinerary should be provided as your proficiency, and quote a plan which can work as your diet. I want you to follow a mentor of yours through a YouTube channel or a blog which you follow, and the article should be quoted as a narration in your career as well, as a proficiency to our Lord that we have quoted him as a mentor. Reflection as a beneficiary. Reflect on a time when your diet affected your focus or mood. How could Sattvic principles have helped this narration as a proof and evidence that you have to focus on your diet or the proficiency which we quote as a narration. I want you to focus on a routine which will help you to lose weight, and I quote aerobics as an exemption, and I want to help you to understand that my mentor Deepti is in place with her channel, that is Dance with Deepti, as a proficiency in my life. I want to quote the narration as an exemption in your itinerary, where a diet or the routine which you follow can be quoted as an exemption, where I found Vipasha Basu as a proficiency in my case. Her name is quoted as a itinerary in my life, where she was part of a curriculum, and she is a verdict in the characteristic, that is a celebrity who can prove her competence. The verdict should be clear to you that if you are following a precautionary measure, that is the quote in narration, and if you are comfortable to perform yoga as an itinerary, and I quote cult as a proficiency in the verdict, and the verdict should be heard to the mentor who is in place with the statements, and I quote my best friend as an exemption in my life, as a proficiency that he wanted me to quote my narration to a friend of mine who can help me to focus on my diet. And the principles that we have to follow is to help the narration to be quoted as an exemption. The diet which you have to follow is in place with your routine, and the diet which can affect your existence is consuming vegetable as an itinerary and boiled vegetable, which is quoted as a narration to me, to be provided as a exemption in my life, where I had to provide statements related to a vegetable which is not part of my itinerary or as a precautionary measure. And I quote this vegetable as a proof and evidence that the itinerary radish is in place with the curriculum. But if we add that as an itinerary in my life, where I have to focus on a diet which includes the quoted narration by a person who's close to my persona, that is my father, as a precautionary measure that empowers the verdict as a exemption. I want the diet to be quoted as a preference to the principle, that is meditation when it comes to focus, and the disciplinary action which we have to take as a proof and evidence that the quoted narration should be quoted as a proficiency, where discipline is in place with the books that we narrate as a proficiency, and the meditative program that we all inculcate in our life, that is a conversation with a friend who can help us grow and inculcate our trajectory as a preference. So the principles which help me to inculcate the itinerary or the conclusion is, the first principle which I follow is finding a space where I can put my narration to a journal which can help me to conclude my statements. Second, writing the name of my Lord as an exemption in my itinerary as a providence. Third, the principle which I quote as an exemption in my life is quoted as a disciplinary measure, where I have to quote this principle as a routine as well, and the principle which helped me to unfold the itinerary, that is positive thinking, is to quote a narration and prove it as a statement. So the principles which are quoted as a routine should be inculcated in your life as a quoted narration, where I see discipline, focus, confidence, and the quoted narration should be provided as a substance to your itinerary. That is the principle which you have to follow. Yes. Sensible narration which you have to quote as your proficiency. A principle which will help you to empower your proficiency. I quote this as a proof. Smart performance as a proficiency in your life. Which Sattvic foods or habits would you start implementing this week and why? The reason I'm quoting this as an exemption in my itinerary as a proficiency in your verdict is, if you follow a routine, you should implement the plan to your audience or the proficiency which you follow. So the plan which I'm quoting as an exemption in my life is the habit which I want my narration to be quoted as a disciplinary measure and as a quoted narration to my audiences. Perform this to read a book which can help me to quote my narration and as a plan which I have to follow, and a book which I want to inculcate in my life as a precautionary measure, book which I want you to note as a precaution or as a measure which you can put as a narration, which is quoted by a mentor of mine, that is Shruthi MN, as a precautionary measure where we can quote a narration as a discipline. And this is the trajectory which I want to quote as a implementation. How does feeding your body consciously relate to feeding your mind and professional development? As a precautionary measure, I want the quoted narration to be inculcated as a proof and evidence that your body wants your narration to be quoted as a reference. Now, when we focus on the three narration, body, mind and soul, as a preference in your context, where soul is in place with your trajectory, but the elevation is in place with your mind. And the quoted narration should be quoted as an example in your conscious mind. Now, it's your time to narrate your experience as a comment in the trajectory. If this resonated with you, subscribe to Smart English Words and set your gateway to learning, career guidance and self-proficiency as a professional advocacy. Like, comment and share to inspire others to elevate their mind and life through knowledge and disciplines. I want to feel your presence in the comments with the quoted narration as an exemption, that the Sattvic food which you will try as a mediocre in the proficiency to be quoted as a narration with a context about the narration which I'm quoting you as an exemption. That is, if it is helping you to focus, or if it is added as a beneficiary in your career, the feedback allows me to create content that truly empowers the audience or the community which we call as language luminary community. Remember, language luminaries, your mind is your most precious asset. Feed it wisely, act with purpose and watch your growth unfold. Let's make this journey together towards clarity, focus and professional growth. See you in the next video.